Overall, a fairly easy pattern to make, and the yarn, just using two balls of color changing yarn. The yarn changes color by itself and you don't even have to do anything. The one part that I really love about this pattern though is that at the very end, I only had 4 tails to weave in. So despite all of the fantastic colors that I have in this scarf, I only had 4 tails to weave in. So I really did appreciate that aspect of the project. Now, since we're using a different yarn altogether than the pattern calls for, the gauge isn't going to be very important. We're just going to knit until we like the size of the shawl that we have. And actually, since I'm using a lighter weight yarn, I'm going to call this a scarf because mine is not going to end up quite as large as the original pattern using the original worsted weight yarn. To begin this scarf, we're going to use color A, and we'll just call one of these color A, the other one's going to be color B. Using the size 8 needles with my sport weight yarn, I'm going to cast on 3 stitches. So I've got 1 on the needle, 2, and then 3. What I'm also going to need is a row counter. I found that this really came in handy. I originally started the pattern without a row counter, and I found that I quickly got lost on which row that I was on. So some method to count your rows really helps. And we'll begin with row 1, which will be the right side. We need to knit through the front and back loop. So knit front and back, which is knitting through the front of that loop, swinging the needle around, and then knitting through the back of that loop. And that creates an extra stitch. We'll knit 1 and then do the same thing, knit front and back. So we'll knit through the front, swing the needle around, knit through the back of that stitch, and now we have 5 stitches on the needle. And that was row 1. Row 2, we'll just knit. That was row 2. Row 3, we're going to bring in the other color, color B. It's right here. And we're going to knit 1. So we'll just join it like that. We'll knit 1, we'll pull that tight in a bit. Knit 1, knit front and back. So the same way we did before, knit through the front loop, swing the needle around, knit through the back loop. And that creates an extra stitch. Then we'll knit 1, knit front and back again, knit front, and there's the back. That creates another extra stitch, and then knit that last stitch. Now there are 7 stitches on the needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, that was row 3. Row 4, we're just going to knit. And these are just the first few setup rows. It gets easier because the next set of rows is going to be what we repeat for the entire pattern. We'll just keep tugging on that end to keep that loop a decent size. So that was row 4. Now, this pattern will have you alternating every 2 rows. So 2 rows of color A followed by 2 rows of color B, and it goes back and forth between those 2 colors every 2 rows. So we just did 2 rows in that second color. Now we're going to do row 5. We're going to pick up color A again, and we're going to knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row. So we'll knit all the way here, got 2 stitches before the end of the row. We'll knit front and back, and then knit 1. Okay, now we've got 9 stitches on the needles. That was row 5. Row 6, we're going to stay with this color, color A, and we're going to knit. Just knit across all those stitches, and then we will be changing again to color B. As I said, 2 rows of color A followed by 2 rows of color B, and that was row 6. Now we're going to do row 7. Now here's a little tip that I like to do when I do color, I have to change colors like this all the time. I prefer that my yarn not get all twisted. So what I will periodically do is move these balls of yarn so that the color I'm about to pick up, I'm always picking up in front of the color that I just finished working. So I want to make sure that when I pick up the next color, I'm picking it up in front of the previous color that I just worked. So row 7, we're picking up color B, and it's going to be knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row, knit front and back, and then knit 1. That was row 7. Row 8, we're just going to knit. Row 9, we're going to be switching back to color A. And here's what I mean when I said earlier that I like to just move the balls of yarn. I am going to just, lift color B over and put it somewhere else, and make sure that when I pick up color A, I am picking it up and it will be in front of, if you could see this, in front of the previous color that I just worked. So row 9, we'll knit 1, knit front and back, knit 1, and here's where we start these center decreases that create that kind of chevron pattern. So this is a center double decrease, and the way we do that is to insert the right hand needle through the first 2 stitches as if we're going to knit them together. And then we knit that 3rd stitch and pass those 2 stitches over that we slid from the left needle to the right needle. We're just going to pass them over. And that decreased 2 stitches. We're going to knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row again. We're going to knit front and back, and then knit 1. That was row 9. And row 10, we're just going to knit. And then we're done with the setup section. Okay, that was row 10. So now, once again, I want to pick up color, what is this, B, and I don't want it to twist. Right now, if I were to pick it up and use it, it would be kind of over color A, but then color A comes back on top, and I just prefer to keep things simple. So I'm going to pick up this ball of yarn and just move it over the color that I need to use next. Okay, so now let's reset our row counter back to 0, 0, and I'm going to be picking up color B. So this is the increase section that I was talking about earlier, row 1, which we're still on the right side with color B. You want to knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 1 stitch before that last center double decrease that you did. So if you follow this center double decrease where you see the stitches kind of, they're mashed together right here, you're going to follow that column up and you'll see that it's this stitch right here, and we want to knit to 1 stitch before that. Okay, so we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, and we're going to do another center double decrease, and that was inserting the right hand needle through the first 2 stitches as if to knit, and then knitting the 3rd stitch and passing those 2 stitches that we slipped, we're going to pass them over. And then we're going to knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row, knit front and back, and then knit 1. And that was row 1 of the increase section. Row 2, knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row, knit front and back, knit 1. So we've increased 2 stitches in that row. Row 3, again, I want to pick up color A, but I don't want it to get all twisted, so I'm going to just move this ball of yarn over the last one I worked and ready to work with color A. And we're on row 3, so knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 1 stitch before that center double decrease, and I see my center double decrease. I'm just following where the 2 stitches were knit or passed over. I'm going to follow that up, and I see that that is this stitch here on the needle. I'm going to knit to 1 stitch before it, and I'm going to do a center double decrease. Just like that. I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row, knit front and back, knit 1. And that was row 3. Row 4, we're just going to knit, here we go with row 5. I once again want to prevent my yarns from tangling, so I'm just going to move those. Row 5 is the same as row 1, and that's just going to be knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, then we'll do a center double decrease. Knit to the last 2 stitches, knit front and back, knit 1. You see that chevron shape starting to form? That was row 5. Row 6. Now here's where things get a little interesting, in that row 6 is knit 1, knit front and back, and then knit to the end of the row. So on this row, we're only increasing 1 stitch. And the effect of that is that it creates that asymmetrical increasing line. If you, I'll show you back on the scarf, but it creates that asymmetrical shape to this scarf. And that was row 6. Row 7, I'm going to move these yarns again. Row 7, we're going to do the same thing we did with row 3. It's knit 1, knit front and back. Oops, split the yarn. Knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, and do a center double decrease. Knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row. Knit front and back. Knit 1 row. And that was row 7. So row 8, and this is the last row of the 8-row repeat for this increasing section. From here, we'll just do the same 8 rows over again. So row 8 is just knit across. And that's it. So you just repeat those same 8 rows over and over until you like the size of this scarf. We're going to call it a scarf, remember, because we're using lighter weight yarn, but you can make it as wide as you want, as skinny as you want, as long as you want, or you could just follow the original pattern. I mean, you will get a skinnier, shorter scarf, and that's perfectly fine too. So just give those 8 rows a try. Just continue repeating that. I knit another repeat of the increase section, and here's where you can really start to see that chevron pattern forming, as well as on one side it's asymmetrical, these increases. So one side will be shorter than the other. Now let's go to the decrease section. I'm going to just reset my row counter, which I just did, and get my yarn situated. Now this, again, just pretend that you've gone and you've repeated this increase section as many times as you want until you get the scarf that's a width that you like. All right, so beginning the decrease section, we are going to start with row 1 of the decrease section. We're going to knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease. You're going to do a center double decrease, and then just knit to the end. So we've decreased 2 stitches in that row. That was row 1. Row 2, we're just going to knit. And we're going to keep that 2-row, repeating 2 rows of color A and then 2 rows of color B. We're just going to maintain what we've been doing for the first half of the scarf. That was row 2. Row 3, I'm gonna switch the yarn again. Again, you don't have to do that, but I just find it more time consuming, I feel like, when I have to stop eventually and untwist many twists in my yarn. All right, row 3, knit 1, knit front and back. I know this is a decrease section, but we're still going to maintain this chevron pattern. So we'll knit front and back. We'll knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, which is right here. We will do a center double decrease. Knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row. Knit front and back, knit 1. Row 4, we're just going to knit. Row 5, knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, which is right here. We'll do a center double decrease, and then knit to the end of the row. Row 6, we're just going to knit. That was row 6. Row 7. Row 7 is going to be the same as row 3, which was a knit 1, knit front and back, knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, do a center double decrease, knit to 2 stitches before the end of the row, knit front and back, whoops, knit 1. That was row 7. And row 8, we're just going to knit. And from there, just like we did with the increase section, we repeated those 8 rows over and over again while we were maintaining that 2-row color changing. We're just going to do the same thing for the decrease section, is repeat those 8 rows until we get to the original pattern calls for 14 stitches. So you just continue doing that decrease section, the 8-row repeats, until you get to 14 stitches. Once you've repeated those 8 decrease rows until you get to, again, 14 stitches like the original pattern calls for, we're going to do the final section. The final section is starting with row 1, so I've reset my row counter, and I got a bit of a tangle here. I wasn't rearranging my yarn like I said I would. But row 1, which will be a right side row, we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the previous center double decrease, which in my case will be right here. We're going to do a center double decrease, and knit to the end of the row. Row 2, we're just going to knit. This final section has a few, 1 or 2 rows with that center double decrease, but then it just goes to decreasing 1 stitch on each side, and that will help it form the, you know, where it comes to a point at the very end of the shawl. Row 3 and 4, we're just going to knit with the alternate color. Nothing special on these 2 rows, just knit all the stitches. Row 5. Here's what I was talking about when I said it just decreased rather at the edge. Row 5, we need to switch yarn colors. Knit 1, SSK. An SSK is a slip knit. We're going to slip 1 stitch knitwise, slip the 2nd stitch knitwise, and then we're going to knit those 2 stitches together through the back loop. And that creates a left leaning decrease, so it's decreasing toward the point that the scarf is coming to. And then we're going to just knit to the end of the row. Row 6, we'll just knit all the stitches. Row 7 and 8 we'll just knit with that alternate color. Again, nothing special. Row 9, knit 1, SSK, knit to 3 stitches before the end of the row, knit 2 together. Now the reason we do a knit 2 together and then knit that last stitch, the reason we do a knit 2 together on this side and an SSK on this side is that the SSK remember, like I said, it leans to the left, which is going toward the end point of this scarf. And the knit two together is a right leaning decrease. So if you can imagine, as this is coming to a point, these decreases are just following that line. So it looks nice when the decreases can follow that line. That was row 9. Row 10, we're just going to knit. (11) and 12, we'll just take the alternate color and we'll just knit rows 11 and 12. Row 13, we'll knit 1, SSK, knit to 3 stitches to the end of the row, knit 2 together, knit 1. Row 14, we're just going to knit. These rows go pretty quickly now that we're at the very end of our scarf here. (15) and 16, we're just going to knit with the alternate color. I've got this entangle going on now. That's okay, we're almost there. 15 and 16, we're just going to knit. Still maintaining that 2-row color change. That was 15 and 16. Row 17. Pick up that other color. Knit 1, SSK, knit 1 and then knit 2 together and then knit 1. So we only have 5 stitches left on the needles. Row 18, we're just going to knit. (19) and 20, we're going to knit. And the very last row is going to be with, still continuing that alternate color, will be knit 1, SSK, knit 2 together. And now we've got 3 stitches on the needle. We're just going to turn the work and bind off. I'm just going to bind off purlwise. And all that means is I'm going to purl 2 stitches, pass 1 stitch over, purl a 2nd stitch, pass 1 stitch over, and then pull a tail through this last stitch. And there you have the super mini version of the Cityscape shawl by Red Heart. Again, just working the few setup rows, the increase section until it's as wide as you like, or just follow the stitch counts in the pattern, followed by the decrease section and then the 20 finishing rows. And that'll get you this really nice scarf.